At the outer edge of the village, where the dirt road began to curve away toward open fields, the light of early morning was just beginning to stretch across the ground. It was a pale, cold light, the kind that softened the edges of things without warming them. Elias had walked this road countless times at first light. Some mornings it was empty. Other mornings it held the quiet traces of night, a paw print in the dust, a scavenger's trail, the shadow of movement slipping between houses. But on this particular morning, his eyes caught something different, a shape too still to be resting, flanked by another that stood rigidly close, the figures resolved as he neared. Two dogs at the roadside, positioned in a narrow strip between the hard-wheel ruts and a shallow drainage ditch. One lay on its side, its body stretched out, a hind leg angled awkwardly, head resting on the packed dirt. The other stood guard, head lowered, shoulders hunched protectively over the still form. There was no movement from the one on the ground. The standing dog shifted occasionally, adjusting its stance in slow, weary motions, but never stepping away. Elias slowed instinctively, stopping several paces short. From this distance he could see the signs of fatigue etched into the guard dog's posture. Its ribs lifted and fell quickly with each breath, sides hollow from what was likely a night without food or water. Its eyes were fixed on him now, not wide with panic, but narrowed in a kind of watchful caution, as if measuring his intent. The early air was cool enough that when the dog exhaled, the faint mist of breath lingered before fading. Its legs trembled subtly beneath it, yet it remained rooted to that spot, every muscle speaking of its refusal to leave. Beside it, the second dog's condition was plain. The head lay at a troubling angle, the kind that spoke not of sleep but of injury. The ear pressed flat into the dirt, a thin trail of dried blood marking a path from the corner of its mouth down toward the dust beneath its muzzle. The fur along its flank was dulled and clumped where it met the ground. Even in stillness, the scene told its own story. The distance between life and the edge of it had grown dangerously small here. The road itself was empty at this hour, the soft hiss of wind moving across the dry grass the only sound. Yet the moment felt heavy with risk. It was a narrow stretch of road, and any sudden approach from a vehicle could bring danger within seconds. If the injured dog could not move, and it clearly could not, then the other's refusal to leave meant both lives hung in a fragile balance. One wrong movement, one loud noise, and the survivor might dash into harm's way or else stay fixed to the spot until exhaustion claimed it too. Elias lowered himself slowly, knees bending until he was crouched, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. The canvas satchel he carried, his usual kit for roadside rescues, slid gently from his shoulder onto the ground. His voice, when it came, was low, level, and meant to carry no demand. "Easy, friend," he murmured. The sound reached the dog, whose ears twitched in response, but it did not retreat or advance. Instead, it leaned its weight fractionally toward the body on the ground, reinforcing the boundary between Elias and its injured companion. From his crouch, he pulled a shallow metal dish from the satchel, its surface catching a thin glint of light as he set it down on the dirt. He poured from a bottle until the water lay still in the dish, the clear scent of it sharp against the dry air. The guard dog's eyes flicked toward it, interest showing in the subtle tightening of focus, but its paws remained anchored in place. It was then that Elias began to notice the smaller details, the ones that revealed the hours before dawn. There were two sets of paw prints in the dust behind them, one a steady, unbroken pattern, the other marked by irregular spacing and uneven drag marks. The disturbed earth traced a line from the edge of the field toward the road. Near the midpoint, a faint smear of blood marked the spot where the injured dog had likely collapsed. The trail that followed was unsteady, suggesting the second dog had stayed alongside, circling, nudging, and refusing to leave as it guided the other forward until they reached this narrow patch of roadside. He felt the weight of what was at stake settle deeper. In rescues like these, there was rarely time for long hesitation. The guard dog's loyalty could also be its undoing. If it ran into the road at the wrong moment, a collision was inevitable. If it stayed without sustenance, exhaustion would strip away the energy it needed to survive. And the injured one, even from a distance. Elias knew its injuries might be beyond recovery, needed immediate evaluation to stand any chance at life. Above them, the pale light grew stronger as the sun edged over the low roof lines at the village's far side. That light slid across the dogs' backs, turning the ridge of the standing one's spine into a faint line of gold. The dog lifted its head toward Elias for a moment, holding his gaze, then turned it back toward the body it guarded. In that silent exchange was a decision still unmade, a calculation between the instinct to protect and the distant possibility of trusting a stranger. Elias knew that choice could not be forced. Forcing meant breaking the fragile link that might be their only hope. A motorbike's engine rose in the distance, faint but unmistakable. The guard dog's posture changed instantly, ears pressing tight against its head, muscles tightening along its shoulders. Its body angled more fully over the injured dog, positioning itself as a barrier. Elias could already see the dust beginning to rise from the road's far bend where the bike would soon appear. If it passed too close, fear could drive the dog into the open lane. He shifted his own stance slightly, angling himself to block that path without rushing forward, knowing that sudden movement might trigger exactly the flight he hoped to prevent. The motorbike passed on the opposite side of the road, its rider glancing briefly but not slowing. The noise trailed away, leaving only the quiet rush of wind in its wake. The guard dog did not relax immediately. It remained angled over the still form, nose lowered until it brushed the other's fur in a slow, deliberate movement. Elias recognized it as more than a simple touch. It was the confirmation, perhaps to itself, that the injured dog was still there, still real in that moment. He stayed in his crouch, patient, letting the seconds stretch. Patience was the only bridge here. In rescues, trust had to be earned before anything else could happen. Until that dog decided he was not a threat, Elias knew his role was simply to be present, steady, and ready. The choice, to step toward the water, to shift just slightly away from the body, would have to come from the dog itself. And with each passing moment, the stakes pressed harder. If they could not move soon, the roadside would remain a place of danger for them both. And the thin line between survival and loss could vanish with a single passing vehicle. The sun lifted higher, the light deepening from pale silver to a gentler gold. It caught in the dust along the road, turning it almost warm in tone, though the air still carried the cool bite of morning. In that changing light, the scene held. One dog unwilling to leave, the other caught in the stillness of injury, and Elias, waiting for the moment when the fragile boundary between them might shift, and a path toward safety could begin. Elias shifted his weight slightly, careful not to break the fragile stillness that held between him and the dog. The water dish remained untouched on the ground, the clear surface catching the light each time the breeze shifted. When he took one slow step forward, the dog responded instantly, lowering its head and stepping sideways to block the narrow gap between them. The movement was deliberate, not frantic, a barrier placed with quiet determination. Elias stopped where he was, his boots settling into the dust. He had seen this posture before. Shoulders squared, body angled forward, every muscle ready to hold ground even when the body itself was trembling from fatigue. The message was unspoken but clear. The dog's tail hung still, neither wagging nor tucked, just poised in the way of an animal caught between distrust and the instinct to protect. It circled once around the motionless body at its feet, the path tight and slow, before resuming its guard position. Elias could hear the faint, uneven rhythm of its breathing now and the slight click of claws on the packed dirt as it shifted its stance again. The sun had risen enough to warm the road, and the heat was starting to rise from the surface, but there was no sign the dog would abandon its post. Every choice it made, every glance toward him, every turn of its body, ended with it back between Elias and the still form on the ground. He spoke again, the words low and steady. "It's all right, boy," though the tone was more important than the meaning. The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't relax. Instead, it lowered its nose to brush the other's neck, then lifted its head just enough to watch Elias from the corner of its eye. That small touch said enough. Leaving was not an option. For the injured animal on the ground, time was running thin. Elias could not yet see the full extent of the damage, but the shallowness of its breathing and the unnatural set of its limbs told him that waiting much longer could mean it would never rise again. If the guarding dog refused him access, the outcome was certain. He reached slowly into his satchel again, retrieving a strip of cloth soaked earlier in clean water. Holding it low, he crouched and placed it on the dirt a few steps away from the dogs. The guard dog's gaze flicked to it briefly but almost immediately returned to him, body tense. Paws rooted. Its weight shifted again toward the injured dog, making the message unmistakable. The barrier would hold. The cloth lay untouched, the water dish still cooling in the morning air. A pair of crows had landed on the far side of the ditch, heads tilting as they watched the scene unfold. The guard dog's eyes darted toward them only for a moment before locking back on Elias, unwilling to divide its attention for long. Even exhaustion could not pull it from its focus. Its coat caught the light now, showing the dust and debris from a long night spent in the open and the darker patches where sweat and dirt clung along its sides. The tremor in its hind legs grew more visible each time it adjusted its stance. Elias knew he needed to act before that fatigue tipped into collapse. If the guarding dog faltered, it might be too late to save either of them. But any sudden move risked triggering flight, and in this stretch of road, running meant danger. If it bolted into the traffic path, the outcome would be immediate. If it retreated into the field with the injured dog, reaching them again could become impossible. Every second now pressed the decision harder, for both of them. He took another slow step, lowering himself further so his posture stayed non-threatening. The dog mirrored his movement with another sidestep, closing the gap to the injured one until their bodies touched. Its head turned just enough to keep both Elias and its sibling in view. That small adjustment confirmed what Elias already knew. The animal's choice was fixed. It would not move unless it believed he posed no danger at all. Until then, the line between them remained. And with each passing moment, the margin for rescue thinned. Elias remained where he was, allowing the moment to breathe. He knew that pushing forward too quickly could undo what little trust he had begun to earn. Yet he also understood that standing still did not mean standing idle. His focus shifted to the ground itself, to the quiet story written there in marks and fragments. Every rescue he had been part of taught him that the earth carried more truth than any first glance at the animal alone. The dirt bore clear evidence of a journey made under strain. Just beyond where the two dogs now stood, the soil was imprinted with a trail of paw prints, two distinct sets. One track was steady, each step falling into place with practiced rhythm, the kind of movement that spoke of an animal in full control of its body. The other track told a different story. It was broken and hesitant, with long gaps where a paw seemed to drag before touching the ground again. Sometimes the prints overlapped as if the injured dog had stumbled sideways into the path of the other. Between many of the steps, faint grooves cut through the dust, the uneven furrows of a limb pulled rather than lifted. He followed the marks with his eyes, tracing the way they meandered toward the road from the open fields beyond. Intermittently, the trail was punctuated by small tufts of fur, each caught with dirt and grass seeds, scattered in irregular patches. These were not the soft, loose hairs shed in the course of a day. They were the kind torn free suddenly, likely during a brief moment of struggle or collision. Some clung to thorny stems at the field's edge. Others lay on the bare dirt, each one a small sign of what had been endured during the night. Near the midpoint of the trail, a thin line of dried blood cut an uneven path. It was not a heavy trail, but one that appeared and disappeared in short stretches, as though the injured dog's mouth or side had made contact with the ground during moments of collapse. The color was dark now, the surface hardened by the cool hours before dawn. Elias's gaze tracked the blood until it faded into a patch of churned dirt beside the narrow drainage ditch. There, the tracks overlapped tightly in circles, compressed into the earth. It was the mark of an animal turning in place again and again, unwilling to leave another that had fallen. He could picture it. One dog pushing gently, maybe nudging with its head, pacing around its companion in the dark, urging movement. From there, the trail continued, slow and uneven, toward the very spot where they now stood. The guarding dog's awareness of him had not lessened. Even as Elias studied the ground, the animal's eyes followed every motion. Its body shifted subtly to keep the injured one shielded. Occasionally, it lowered its nose to the other's shoulder or flank, the touch brief, as if checking for any change. The injured dog's breathing was shallow and irregular, the chest rising in smaller increments than it should. The stillness of its limbs, paired with that breathing, confirmed the damage was not minor. These signs told him the night had been long and unforgiving. Somewhere beyond the fields, an injury had struck, a fight with another dog or wild animal, or perhaps a collision with something harder and faster. Whatever it was, it had left one unable to walk properly and the other faced with a choice. The prints, the fur, and the pacing circles all suggested that choice had been made instantly. The healthy dog had stayed, guiding, guarding, and refusing to leave, even when the journey became a slow, halting push toward the village's edge. But now, distance was no longer the measure. They had made it to the road, but the danger here was constant. Elias knew that time was working against them. The injured dog's condition, the stiffness and fatigue in the one still standing, and the slow but certain approach of daily activity from the village all combined into a narrowing window. In minutes, motorbikes, carts, or small trucks could begin using this stretch. If the guard dog reacted poorly, darting into the road to avoid him or anyone else, the consequences could be immediate. If it stayed rooted to the ground, refusing to move even as traffic passed, it might still be struck. For the injured one, every extra moment without help meant a greater chance that injuries would become irreversible. A light wind swept across the road, lifting fine dust into the air. It skimmed over the surface of the tracks, softening their edges. Each gust made the marks a little harder to see, as if the night's story was being erased grain by grain. Elias knew that soon there would be no physical trace of their journey at all, only the two dogs left to tell it. He returned his attention to them, his movements measured. From his satchel, he pulled a folded blanket, shaking it open just once to spread it flat on the ground a few paces away. The sound drew the guard dog's gaze for a moment, but its stance did not shift. It stood squarely over the injured one, body angled to block any advance. Its ears flicked toward him and then forward again, alert to any movement. Elias noted the tremor still running through its back legs, the dust embedded in its fur, and the dry line of skin visible between the ribs. These were the marks of an animal that had walked too far without food or water, yet it held its place as if nothing else mattered. The scene held a balance that could break in any direction. If the guard dog chose to trust, even slightly, Elias could step closer, assess the injured one, and prepare a careful lift. If it did not, the odds shifted toward the road and the slow decay of exhaustion. He understood that this was not a decision he could make. His role was to show he would not harm them, to prove by stillness and calm that he could be allowed near. In that space between them, where wind smudged the trail and light grew stronger over the fields, every second counted, and every choice would decide whether the past night's struggle had been enough to carry them into another day. The guard dog lowered its head again, brushing the injured one's side in a brief, deliberate movement before looking back toward Elias. It was not an invitation, but it was an acknowledgement. For now, That was all there was. Two animals bound by what they had endured and a rescuer waiting in the narrowing gap between danger and the chance to intervene. Elias adjusted his position, lowering himself so that his height no longer loomed over the two animals. His movements were slow and unhurried, each one meant to show he would not force the distance closed. The guard dog's eyes followed him closely, its stance still firm over the motionless body beside it. He reached for the satchel at his side, pulling out the shallow tin dish he had set down earlier. The water inside caught the morning light, a faint ripple forming as he slid it forward across the dust. The sound of it touching the ground was soft, but it was enough to draw a flicker of attention from the dog. Its ears shifted, and its head turned fractionally toward the offering before returning to its fixed watch over the injured one. The air was warming now, the sun drawing the chill from the road. Elias could see the way the guard dog's sides moved with each breath, faster than they should for an animal at rest. Thirst was pressing on it, but instinct held it in place. He stayed still, his hands resting open on his knees, gaze steady but not challenging. Minutes passed like this, each one a silent negotiation. The only sounds were the faint rustle of the grass in the ditch and the shallow, uneven breathing of the dog lying on the ground. Elias shifted slightly, extending his arm to slide the water dish a little closer. The guard dog tensed at the movement, a ripple of muscle running along its back, but it did not step away or forward. It watched the dish settle in the dirt, the scent of fresh water now within easy reach. The tip of its nose twitched, testing the air before its gaze returned to Elias. That hesitation was important. Hesitation meant thought, and thought meant the possibility of choice. He kept his voice low, letting it fall into the space between them. "You're all right." The words carried no demand, only tone, and the guard dog's ears turned toward the sound. It stepped once toward the dish, then stopped, head lowering to check the injured one again. Its nose brushed against the still dog's shoulder, a brief, grounding touch, before it returned its attention to the water. Another step followed, slower this time, claws making a faint scrape on the road. When it reached the edge of the dish, the dog lowered its head fully, lapping once, then lifting its gaze back to Elias as if weighing the risk. Elias did not move, not even to blink away the dust. The dog returned to the water, drinking in small, cautious pulls. Each swallow was a sign that the barrier between them was loosening. Trust in moments like this was never absolute. It was built in small increments, earned by the absence of threat. For the first time since he had arrived, Elias was able to take in the full state of the healthy dog. Dust coated its legs to the knee, and there were scratches across its muzzle, thin lines of dried blood marking where brambles or claws had caught it. Its body was lean, too lean, the bones at the hips more visible than they should be. These were the signs of a night spent working beyond its strength, and yet it had not abandoned its place. The injured dog shifted faintly then, a shallow exhale breaking the rhythm of its breathing. The guard dog reacted instantly, stepping back from the water to return to its position at its side. Elias noted the speed of the reaction. It had been willing to accept the water only until it sensed movement in its companion, and then the bond took precedence again. That reflex spoke to the core of the challenge ahead. Gaining enough trust to approach one meant nothing if it could not be extended to touch the other. Still, progress had been made. The dog had taken from him something it needed and had not seen that action as a threat. Elias knew this was the first step toward any chance of moving them both to safety. But time remained a constant pressure. The road would not stay quiet, and the injured dog's breathing was growing shallower. Each decision from here would need to be measured in how quickly it could bring them away from the danger pressing in on all sides. The shift in the guard dog's posture gave Elias a narrow window. It stood just far enough to one side, still watchful but not directly blocking him, its eyes moving between the water dish and the still body at its feet. He lowered himself further, placing his weight evenly so his movements remained slow and balanced. Inch by inch, he closed the space until he was near enough to see the injured dog clearly. What had been blurred shapes from a distance now resolved into the stark outlines of damage. Fur clumped with dried blood along the shoulder, a deep swelling at the base of the rib cage, and a hind leg twisted in a way no natural rest could explain. He kept his breath steady, the air around them already fragile with the tension of proximity. The injured dog's eyes were half-closed, the lids heavy, showing only the barest glint beneath. Its chest rose and fell in shallow motions, the rhythm uneven, with long pauses between each breath. Elias counted them without meaning to, feeling the space between rise and fall stretch further. The scent of dried blood was faint but present, mixed with the dust that clung to its fur. This was not the exhaustion of a long night's journey, it was the body's slow withdrawal from the effort of holding on. The guard dog stepped forward then, its flank brushing the injured one's side, head lowering to hover just above its neck. Its ears were turned back slightly, not in submission, but in the quiet reflex of protection. The contact seemed to steady the one on the ground for a moment, a small sigh escaping before the shallow breathing resumed. Elias did not reach out immediately. Every instinct told him that the trust he had begun to earn was still thin, and that one wrong motion could snap it entirely. He let his gaze take in the signs as plainly as they appeared. The swelling that would restrict lung capacity, the stiffness in the limbs suggesting internal trauma, and the coolness in the pause that signaled blood flow was slowing. There was no mistaking it. These were injuries that would not reverse themselves, no matter how much care was offered. The realization carried weight, but there was no room for hesitation. The injured dog's condition meant they could not afford to remain here, yet any attempt to move it could push the guard dog into panic, and panic could put all three of them in the road. A shift in the wind brought the sounds of the village closer, distant voices, the clatter of a cartwheel on stone. Time was narrowing. The road that had been empty at first light would soon see traffic, and once that began, standing here would become a gamble they could not win. Elias reached slowly into his satchel, withdrawing the folded blanket again. His eyes stayed on the guard dog, gauging its reaction as he opened the fabric, letting it fall loosely across his knees. The dog's gaze followed the movement, body tensing, but it didn't step forward to block him. He leaned just enough to let the edge of the blanket rest on the ground near the injured dog's hind leg. The guard dog lowered its head, sniffing at the fabric, then turned back to its sibling. That brief acceptance was a small shift, but it was enough to tell him there was still a path forward. The injured one's breathing remained shallow, each rise of the chest a reminder that their time to act was measured now in minutes, not hours. Elias stayed crouched, letting the moment hold, aware that this was the last calm space they might have before the next move. The guard dog stood close enough that its shadow partially covered the other's body, its weight leaning subtly toward it as though even in stillness it could shield against what was coming. The light on the road had sharpened, and the air felt heavier, but neither dog moved. The only change was in the rhythm of breathing, steady in one, faltering in the other, a quiet, unavoidable truth settling over them all. Elias stayed low, the blanket still resting loosely across his knees, and made no attempt to move the injured dog just yet. The guard dog stood close enough that its front paw brushed against its sibling's hind leg, its body angled so that no part of the other lay unshielded. The injured one's breathing was now shallow to the point of fragility, the rise of its chest barely lifting the fur before it sank again. Each breath took longer to return, and the pauses in between felt heavy in the air. Elias recognized the signs. There was no pulling it back from this edge. Moving it now would only rob them of the time left. The guard dog lowered its head, muzzle resting lightly against the other's neck. The contact was gentle, unmoving, as though it understood without knowing that stillness mattered. Elias remained where he was, eyes shifting between them, and let the moment hold. His role now was to ensure safety, to make sure no passing vehicle or sudden noise interrupted what could not be stopped, The road ahead was still empty, but the faint hum of movement from the village grew nearer, the day pressing forward regardless of what happened here. Dust stirred at their feet as a breeze moved along the road, lifting the scent of warm earth. The healthy dog didn't flinch, didn't look away from its sibling, and only pressed a little closer so that the fur of their shoulders touched. The injured one exhaled slowly, a sound so faint it was almost lost to the wind, and for a moment its body seemed lighter, as if letting go of a weight. Elias could see the change in its breathing, less effort, more space between each attempt, and knew the next would not come. When it happened, it was without movement. The chest simply did not rise again. The guard dog remained still for several seconds, then adjusted its position slightly, leaning in to nudge the other's head with the tip of its nose. There was no reaction. It lingered like that, the gesture repeated once before settling back into stillness. Elias let the silence remain unbroken, understanding that for this animal, the moment of leaving was not marked by time, but by the absence that settled in the air. The risk of the road was still there. Without the injured one, the guard dog might bolt in confusion or stay rooted in grief, either choice putting it in danger. But for now, forcing distance between them felt wrong. He allowed the dog to stand as it chose, its breathing steady but deeper now, as though it had released some unspoken effort. The sun had risen higher, the warmth pooling along the roadside, and the village sounds crept closer, faint wheels on stone and voices carried on the wind. Elias knew the moment would have to end soon, that he would have to step forward, lift the body, and guide the living one toward safety. But not yet. For now, there was only the breeze, the soft press of fur against fur, and a road lined with stillness before the day's movement began again. Elias waited until the guard dog shifted its weight away from the still body, a small step that broke the position it had held for hours. The movement was hesitant, but it was enough for him to begin. He rose slowly, folding the blanket back into his arms, and stepped forward with measured care. The surviving dog watched him, its eyes following each motion. Ears angled back in uncertainty, but without the rigid defiance of before. The injured one lay motionless now, the silence around it unbroken except for the soft rustle of dry grass in the ditch. Elias crouched, extending a hand not to touch but to let the survivor take in his scent again. The dog's nose moved faintly, then it glanced past him toward the body before lowering its gaze. He knew this was the point where time could not stretch further. The road was still quiet, but voices from the village carried more clearly, and the metallic rattle of a bicycle chain sounded somewhere nearby. He adjusted his stance, holding the blanket out as he moved toward the dog. Its tail shifted once, a brief flick, before it allowed him close enough to loop an arm gently beneath its chest. The animal stiffened at first, paws pressing into the ground, but his slow, even lift met no struggle. Its weight was less than he expected, too light for a dog of its frame, and he could feel the steady rhythm of its heartbeat against his arm. As he rose, the dog's head turned sharply over his forearm, eyes locking again on the spot where its sibling lay. It held that gaze for several seconds, ears forward, the rest of its body still. Elias began walking, his pace deliberate to keep the animal balanced. Each step he took drew them farther from the roadside, but the dog's head turned back again and again, ears twitching at the faintest shift of wind or sound behind them. The behavior was instinctive, a refusal to lose sight of where it had last stood guard. The air was warmer now, the sunlight falling across the road in sharper bands. The dog's breathing was calm but deep, the kind that came after long exertion. Elias adjusted his grip so its front legs rested more securely against his arm, supporting the weight evenly. Every few steps, the dog would lift its head higher, scanning the road they had left, its body leaning fractionally in that direction before settling again. What was at risk had shifted, but not disappeared. They were no longer standing exposed where a passing vehicle could take them by surprise, but they were still on open ground. The village was close enough that people could appear suddenly, and a startled dog might try to leap from his arms. His hold remained firm, but without pressure, ready to steady the animal if it tensed. They reached the edge of the track leading toward the shelter, a narrow path lined with scrub. Here, the dog's head lifted one last time, gaze fixed on the road. The patch of dirt where its sibling had lain was no longer visible, hidden by the rise in the land, but Elias could feel in the animal's posture that it knew the direction. He paused briefly, allowing it that final look before stepping forward again. The sound of their movement through the dry grass filled the space between them, the road fading behind, the shelter drawing nearer with each quiet step. The pen was small but dry, its floor lined with fresh straw that rustled faintly under the dog's paws. Elias had set a shallow dish of water in one corner and the scent of clean food in another, but the animal had moved toward neither. Instead, it had taken a place along the far wall, its body angled so that its flank pressed against the wooden boards. Its head rested low between its shoulders, eyes half closed but alert enough to follow any sound from outside. The space was quiet, with only the muffled noises of other dogs reaching through from the adjoining runs, but each faint bark or whine seemed to pass over it without drawing a response. For the first hours, Elias watched from a distance, noting that the dog rarely shifted position. When someone entered with fresh bedding, it did not growl or retreat, but it also made no move toward them. The pattern was constant, ears turning slightly toward movement, eyes opening a little wider, and then the head lowering again. It was not fear that held it still, but something heavier. The absence of its sibling seemed to have settled like a weight in the air, shaping the animal's behavior as clearly as any visible injury. On the second day, Elias brought in the same water dish from the roadside, cleaned and filled anew. He set it down in the same slow manner he had before, placing it within reach. The dog's gaze followed the motion, but lingered afterward on the space beyond the open pen door, where light spilt in from the yard. It drank eventually, though the pauses between each mouthful were long, as though its attention drifted elsewhere. The food remained untouched until the following morning. In the yard, other dogs moved with more noise, tails lifting, paws scratching at the ground, and brief bursts of play breaking into the stillness. The survivor watched them through the mesh, its body remaining close to the wall. Occasionally, it would stand and walk a few slow steps to the gate, nose lifted to catch scents carried in on the wind, before returning to the exact spot it had claimed. Elias recognized it as a kind of anchor point, a chosen place to return to when the surroundings felt uncertain. Days passed like this, the pen holding a rhythm that was almost unchanging. The dog's coat began to lose the dust and dullness it had carried from the road, its breathing steady now, muscles no longer trembling with exhaustion. Yet in its eyes there remained a distance, a searching that found no answer. Each time Elias approached, the dog would look toward him, then past him, as if expecting another shape to follow. What was at risk had shifted from the urgency of the roadside to the quieter, slower danger of disconnection. Without rebuilding trust in this new place, the animal could remain withdrawn, less likely to adapt when rehoming becomes possible. Elias knew that regaining its confidence would take time, measured not in hours, but in the slow, steady patience of repeated care. For now, the most important thing was that it was safe, with water to drink, food to eat, and a space no harm could enter. Late in the afternoon, as the light turned warmer and shadows stretched along the ground outside the pen, the dog lifted its head fully for the first time that day. It watched the yard for a while, ears shifting at the movement of others, then lowered itself back against the wall. In the stillness, the absence of the sibling remained, a quiet shape that no sound or scent could replace. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass, carrying with it the faint rustle of a day's end settling in.